This is the first slide of a presentation that was done for a lesson study that was based on bioscopes. And the topic of this lesson is single station forecasting using an idealized weather pattern as the basis for predicting next day's weather. This is based on the recognition of moving spatial patterns. So this lesson began with a review of something that is already in the mathematics curriculum at the 7th grade level, and that is the understanding of visual patterns called tessellations. And these are some examples of tessellations. Students were reminded about the spatial patterns, but they also listened to some audio temporal patterns to introduce them to the idea that patterns can have a time component. Most students haven't been exposed to time-based or temporal patterns before, so that was explained to them and defined at this point. And the next step is to demonstrate to them that temporal patterns can be visual, in other words, animations. Okay, so here's an example of a temporal pattern that has an audio temporal pattern and a visual temporal pattern that are coordinated. The next temporal patterns that students were exposed to was a cartoon that is essentially of something that is stationary, a stationary bird, but it's moving in a way that repeats over and over again. And then on the right there is a wave that is an animated wave that is moving across from left to right. So really this is the last step in pattern recognition before looking at the moving patterns that are embedded in weather systems. Okay, students viewed this animation of satellite composited cloud patterns, and they had already been exposed to the concepts of air masses and fronts and station models in lessons that just slightly preceded this lesson. So they were asked to notice that, or to look for patterns that had similar characteristics to the patterns that they had just learned about, and most of them were able to point out that the weather systems were moving at about the same speed and same spacing from west to east, and many of them also recognized that these were the cloud patterns were frontal features that were in between the clear areas that were represented by weather masses or by air masses. The next step was to look at an animated surface weather chart with isobars and fronts and high and low pressure centers. And in a situation that is similar to what they saw with the satellite cloud features, satellite recorded cloud features, which are also on this, by the way, they could observe that high pressure centers, which represent air masses, and low pressure centers and troughs, which represent fronts, are moving from west to east. The next step was to review the station model that is used to record surface weather observation measurements on a weather chart. This had been taught just previous to this lesson, but and students were taught how to use the instruments for measuring temperature, humidity, pressure, wind speed, just at the same time that they were taught to use station models, but many of them didn't really absorb a whole lot of the features of, or at least not accurately, the features of a station model during the previous lessons. So this is a station model right from the copied right from the National Weather Service site, and these were shown to students, but they weren't really expected to remember these features. Just this is just to know that station models often have the weather noted on them, and that the weather usually has to do with some sort of precipitation. How to interpret the wind barbs on station models was reviewed, and in particular, how to figure out what direction and velocity the wind is. Cloud cover was briefly reviewed, but mostly on the basis of the more the dot is colored in, the cloudier it is, and if it's all colored in, then it's overcast. And students then observed a more complex animated chart with station models on it, and were asked to try to put their eye on one station and watch the variations in wind speed and direction. This was a little bit tough, but fortunately there was a very high resolution projector, a high definition projector in the room that we used. So some of them could actually visualize that by looking at the screen. And this is the National Weather Service standard surface plot chart that was copied in, and this was given to the students as a template that was used in a smaller version. And here's the smaller version, along with a clear overlay sheet. The station that was observed was the Chattanooga Airport, primarily because the fictionalized pattern that is kind of a general representation of moving weather patterns in the mid latitudes in the fall or spring. Those were on the overlay, and students were move them across from left to right, placing the day number at the arrow, and then translating the station model from the overlay that was on top of the station on that day to a chart, so that they could look for a pattern in or a number of patterns in the overlay as the weather systems crossed above the observation station. Here's the hand-drawn weather pattern that was created specifically for this exercise. It is shown here because we wanted to save overlay. It was created with two strips on a single overlay, and then these were apart. This is the worksheet that students were given. The dot is there for them to fill in, and it was explained to them how to fill in the station model again, and the first station model from the overlay. Everybody did that together in the class, and then students were asked to fill in the rest of the station models for the other 16 days on their own. And most of them did fairly well. Some needed a fair amount of prompting. And this is what students should have accomplished if they copied the station models accurately. And after they did this, they were asked to look for patterns. And the first pattern that they were asked to look at is the winds. And you can see that the winds are rotating around the station in a clockwise pattern as air masses and fronts move across the station. Also, there's a change in temperature and humidity and cloudiness. The what is represented here is the metric temperature and dew point and sea level pressure in millibars. So all of the patterns in all of these measurements were pointed out to students, and they were asked to separate these based or label them based on whether they were an air mass or a frontal situation. And this is how they were supposed to be labeled based on whether it was in an air mass or a front. This was put up after the patterns were discussed with students, just so those who weren't following this real closely or were having some problems could see everything written down. This is the exit ticket. It's a piece of what would be a larger pattern that is not shown, and it's the weather for the previous 6 days, or for this day and the previous 5 days, and students are asked to use the pattern that was developed with the generalized weather system to make a prediction about what the weather would be on day 7. And nearly all of them were able to make the connection that because the pattern repeated over and over again, that you could just match up this pattern underneath the pattern that was on the first set of station models, and then just look at the next day pattern from that set of station models to make an estimate of what would happen on day 7. This was really a pretty good exercise as far as the students understanding and completing the exercise. On average, 1 or 2 students in each of the 2 classes were not able to complete this accurately. All of the rest of them, and these were classes of about 20 students, all the rest of the students were able to complete the exercise accurately and label the air masses and fronts.